It was a day like many others in the bustling streets of Capernaum. The air was thick with the dust of countless feet and the murmur of a crowd pressing in close to a man who had become a legend. People were everywhere, those who sought healing, those who wanted to hear his words, and those simply caught up in the excitement. The man they were all watching was Jesus, a rabbi whose teachings had turned the world upside down, a healer whose miracles had sparked hope in even the most hopeless hearts. Among the crowd, though, was a woman who could hardly be seen. She wasn't rich nor famous, and certainly not a woman of power. She was someone who, for 12 long years, had been a shadow of herself, weighed down by a suffering that had stolen her life. She had been bleeding endlessly, unrelentingly, a flow of blood that had never stopped. For 12 years, she had visited every doctor in search of a cure, spent all her money, endured countless treatments, and still, the bleeding remained. Worse yet, the law declared her unclean, making her an outcast in her own community. She couldn't even touch anyone or be touched without causing someone else to become ritually impure. She was isolated. She was broken, and she had no hope left. But today, something was different. She had heard the stories of a man named Jesus, a man who healed the blind, who gave strength to the lame, who even raised the dead. Could he be the one who could heal her too? Was it possible that he could restore not just her body, but her life? The crowd was thick, the air heavy with anticipation. Jesus was walking through the streets, surrounded by a sea of people, his disciples close by, his every movement watched by eager eyes. The woman knew this might be her one and only chance. Her heart raced as she slipped through the mass of people, her eyes fixed on him. She didn't need to speak to him. She didn't need to ask for anything. She knew that if she could just touch his garment, the hem of his robe, she would be healed. She had nothing left to lose, no other hope to cling to. With trembling hands, she reached out, and her fingers brushed the edge of his cloak. Instantly, she felt it. Something indescribable, something powerful that surged through her, washing away the pain, the weakness, the years of suffering. The bleeding stopped. She could feel it. She was healed. Her body, once frail and weak, was now whole. For the first time in 12 years, she felt clean. But then Jesus stopped. The woman's heart skipped a beat. She had been so sure that if she just touched him, if she could slip away unnoticed, she would go back to her life, healed but unremarkable. But now Jesus had paused. He turned around, scanning the crowd, his eyes moving over the sea of faces until he fixed his gaze on her. "Who touched me?" he asked, his voice calm but firm. The disciples were quick to reply, puzzled. "You see the people crowding against you, and yet you ask, 'Who touched me?'" they said. "How can we know?" But Jesus knew. He felt the power go out of him. This was no ordinary touch. It wasn't just the touch of a hand brushing against fabric. It was a touch of faith, a touch of desperation, a touch that had reached out, not just to his robe, but to him. The woman's heart began to race. She had hoped to remain unnoticed, to be healed in secret. But now there was no way to hide. She could feel the eyes of the crowd on her as she stepped forward, her knees weak with fear. She fell at his feet. "I'm the one," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I've been suffering for 12 years. I've spent all my money on doctors and no one could help me. But when I touched you, I was healed. I'm healed." There was a long, silent moment. Then Jesus spoke. "Daughter," he said, his voice soft, filled with compassion, "your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering." She looked up, tears welling in her eyes. Daughter. The word pierced her heart. She had been an outcast, unwanted, unclean for so long. And now this man, this teacher, this healer, had called her daughter in that one word. He had given her something she had never had in all those years. Belonging, acceptance, love. As she stood up, something deep inside her shifted. She was not just healed in body, she was healed in spirit. For the first time in years, she felt whole, not just as a woman restored to health, but as a woman who had been seen, heard, and cared for. Her faith, fragile and desperate though it had been, had touched the very heart of God. And as she walked away, no longer burdened by her suffering, she knew that her life would never be the same again. Amen.